On a hot September night in Lincoln, New Mexico territory, the kind of night when the desert kept its heat like a grudge, Billy the Kid sat alone at a corner table with the one thing in town that could still make him feel like a boy instead of a wanted man. A plate of red Chile, New Mexico enchiladas, stacked high and steaming. The local dish folks swore he liked better than whiskey or sleep. The tortillas were soft and soaked through with brick red sauce, onions sharp on his tongue, a fried egg on top, bleeding into everything. And every bite pulled him away from the dust and the gun smoke, and back to half-remembered kitchens, to the years when he was just Henry, or maybe Antrim, or McCarty, before the territory and the newspapers started calling him Billy the Kid. The year was 1877, a year before Lincoln would tear itself apart over cattle and contracts, and the right to sell beef to the army. But anyone with eyes could already taste trouble in the air, mixed with the smell of mesquite smoke and boiling beans. The town was a tinderbox, and sometimes all it took was a single cruel word to light the fuse. The restaurant was small for a place that carried so much noise. 4 tables, a worn counter, a kitchen in the back that glowed gold through a curtain of faded calico. Lanterns smoked in their glass chimneys, lining the walls and painting everyone with that same tired yellow that made it hard to tell who was rich and who was just pretending. Billy had his hat tipped low, shoulders relaxed in a way that was half real and half performance. A boy's lean frame pretending to be a man who wasn't worried about the price on his head. He listened to the scrape of cutlery, the murmur of Spanish from a couple of vaqueros by the window, the piano drifting from the saloon across the dusty street, and he let the enchiladas work their slow magic on his bones. Her voice came first, soft but clear, like water over stone. "Everything all right with your plate, mister?" He looked up, and there she was. She was 20 maybe, and absurdly beautiful in a way that made you straighten without thinking, but not in the polished porcelain manner of the banker's daughters who passed the window in stiff Sunday dresses. This girl's beauty was the kind that had been shaped by work and sun and stubbornness. Dark hair braided back, but already escaping in curls around her ears, shoulders squared from carrying heavy trays, hands stained faintly with chili and coffee. Her skin told another story, one that people in town whispered about. Where most folks wore one color, hers came in 2. Along her throat and the line of her collarbone, the skin was a warm, even brown, but then pale patches interrupted it, like spilled milk, a pale crescent curling up behind her left ear, another sweeping over her right cheek and eye, as if some absent-minded god had pressed a thumb there and forgotten to finish the work. The lantern light caught those lighter islands and made them glow faintly, softer than the rest, and Billy realized he was staring. She noticed too. Her fingers tightened just a moment around the pot of coffee she was carrying, and he saw the familiar flicker in her eyes, the tiny flinch that came before she put on whatever expression made the day easier. Before she could, he forced his gaze back to his plate and said, "These are the best I've had since ever, I reckon. You tell whoever's back there, they just bought themselves a loyal customer." That tugged a real smile out of her, quick as a bird darting from a bush. "That'd be Mrs. Kincaid. And me," she added, a little proud despite herself. "I'm Leah, Billy," he said, then remembered he wasn't supposed to be Billy anywhere. He planned to sit a while. "Billy Antrim," he corrected, picking one of his old names like a card from a deck. She didn't blink at the change. Folks in Lincoln were used to men with more than one name. "Well, Mr. Antrim," she said, pouring him more coffee, "if you keep talking that kind about the food, maybe Mrs. Kincaid won't notice you're taking up her corner table half the night." Her tone was teasing but respectful, threaded with that careful politeness people used with strangers who might turn ugly if pushed. He heard it, and something in him disliked it. "You can drop the mister," he said lightly. "Just Billy is fine." The door opened then, slammed really hard enough that dust jumped from the rafters and the lantern nearest the door shivered on its hook. The conversation in the room dropped by half, like somebody had put a hand over its mouth. 4 young men poured in, loud with the kind of laughter that was meant to be heard. They smelled of good whiskey and expensive soap, their boots too clean for real work, their hats creased stylishly, but unused to real weather. Their vests and ties carried the colors of every piece of power in Lincoln: cattle, money, wagons, law. Clay Doyle led the pack, with his father's sharp cheekbones and a silver steerhead pinned to his lapel, the son of Seamus Doyle, who held the Army beef contract and half the land up the Rio Bonito in his fist. Amos Pike's boy, Nate, was right behind him, a slimmer figure with watchful eyes and a banker's white shirt. His father owned the only bank that mattered within a day's ride, and the mortgage on half the buildings in town. Julian Carr swaggered in next, Freight King Luther Carr's youngest, the one who had been sent east for schooling, and come back with fancier boots and new ways to look down his nose. Last was Virgil Sloat Jr., lanky, his father's badge glinting on his vest, though the boy didn't have any right to wear it. His daddy held the sheriff half in his pocket, and the judge in the other. Tonight they drifted in without their fathers, but everyone in the room felt those older men anyway, like shadows stretching through the door behind their sons. "Evening, gentlemen," Mrs. Kincaid called from the back, wiping her hands on her apron as she stepped out from the kitchen. She was 50 and stout, with iron gray hair braided and pinned away from her face, the kind of woman who could break a man's stubbornness as easily as another might break a plate. "You here to eat, or just take up space?" Clay grinned the way a boy does who's never had to hear the word no. "Both, ma'am. Heard you had a new girl working the tables." His gaze slid past her and found Leah at Billy's elbow. It went sharp and ugly in an instant, as if someone had flipped a coin and it had landed on its edge. "Well now," he drawled, "if that ain't the prettiest little patchwork doll this side of the Rio Grande." Leah's shoulders stiffened, but she didn't turn away. Billy saw the fight in that small movement, the choice not to hide, and he felt something in his chest answer it. "Clay Doyle, you mind your mouth in my place," Mrs. Kincaid said, voice flat as a skillet. "Sit yourself down like you've got some sense, and Leah will bring you supper same as anyone." "Oh, I've got sense," Clay said, sauntering closer, his boots ringing loud on the plank floor. "Sense enough to know when something ain't natural. Look at her." He gestured with his chin at the pale sweep along Leah's cheek, as if she were some livestock he was appraising. "Part shadow, part ghost. Ma always said markings like that mean a witch in the family tree. Maybe that's why the coffee's so strong." The boys laughed. It wasn't a real laugh. It was sharp and thin, thrown like gravel. "Clay," Mrs. Kincaid warned. Nate Pike looked uncomfortable, but he laughed anyway. The sound stuck in his throat. Julian's eyes flicked around the room, checking whether anyone might disapprove. When he saw most heads turn down toward plates, his shoulders loosened. Virgil Sloat Jr. pushed against the doorframe with his heel, looking bored, but there was calculation in his eyes that Billy recognized. Virgil was measuring how far this could go before it turned into trouble for him. Leah's hands were steady when she picked up Clay's empty cup, but Billy saw the way her jaw tightened. "Coffee?" she asked, as if nothing had been said. Clay stepped in closer, so close she had to tilt her chin up to meet his eyes. "You heard me, Broxa," he murmured, low but not low enough. "You serving up curses with that coffee. Maybe that's why the ranch hands keep coming back." His fingers brushed the pale patch at her cheek, quick and disrespectful, as if testing whether the color would smudge. She jerked back as if he'd slapped her. The room went quieter still, as if the lanterns were holding their breath. Mrs. Kincaid started forward, but Nate caught her arm, not unkindly. "Now ma'am, no need for a fuss. Clay's just talking." "Your boy is talking himself into being banned from this place," she snapped, yanking her arm free. "Leah, go top off table 3, I'll handle these." Clay stepped sideways, blocking Leah's path, hand closing around her wrist. His grip wasn't hard enough to bruise yet, but it had the promise of it. "You don't walk away when I'm talking to you, girl," he said. "That's rude. My PA says people like you ought to remember their place. Half blood, half faded, half something. You're lucky anyone lets you serve them at all." Leah tried to smile past it, the way she'd been taught to survive, but the effort broke halfway. "Let go, Mr. Doyle," she said quietly. "Please." He shoved her then, not so hard that he could be accused of meaning to hurt her, just enough to send her staggering back into the edge of a table. A tray of plates and coffee cups went spinning. Crockery shattered like gunshots. Hot coffee splashed across her skirt and hands, and she gasped, crumpling to her knees on the wet, dirty floorboards, the pale patches on her skin gone blotchy with heat and humiliation. One of the vaqueros at the window swore under his breath. The rest of the room didn't move. They had mortgages at Pike's Bank, cattle fattening on Doyle's land, sons riding on Sloat's pauses. They looked away not because they didn't care, but because they were tired of paying the price for caring. Billy felt it all stack up inside him, heavy as iron. He'd been trying to live quiet lately, doing what work he could, keeping his head down while the law and his past tangled over what exactly to call him and how badly they wanted him dead. He knew what it meant to tangle with the kinds of men who sired boys like this, and he knew that stepping in would blow whatever chance he had of staying small and forgettable. But he also knew what it felt like to be shoved down while the room watched and did nothing. At 16 he'd lain in the dirt while a bully's fists slammed into him, until panic had flipped a switch and his hand had gone for the gun at his hip, and nothing in his life had been simple again. He told himself he'd learned from that. He told himself he wasn't that hair-trigger kid anymore. Then he heard Clay's next words. "Look at the witch cry," Clay sneered, standing over Leah as she tried to gather the broken cups with scorched fingers. "Down on the floor where she belongs. You're inferior, you know that. Filthy. My PA says some blood just ain't worth the same as other folks. Maybe we ought to wash you clean and see what's left." The boys laughed again, louder. Virgil stepped forward, as if to nudge a piece of broken plate toward her with the toe of his boot, just to see her flinch. That was as far as Billy's better judgment got. His chair scraped back hard enough to bite into the floor. In the sudden hush, the sound was a shot by itself. Clay turned just in time to take Billy's fist square in the mouth. It made a wet, flat sound, flesh and cartilage and surprise colliding. Clay staggered back, crashed into the counter, and slid to the floor, clutching at his lip, as blood blossomed bright against his fingers. "You son of a..." Nate Pike started, but Billy was already moving, his body finding the old familiar map of violence before his mind even caught up. He stepped into Nate's swing, caught the boy's wrist, and twisted, driving an elbow into his gut. Nate folded around it, air leaving him in a choked grunt as he dropped to his knees next to Clay. Julian lunged at Billy with more enthusiasm than skill. The Eastern schooling hadn't included barroom brawls. Billy sidestepped, hooked Julian's ankle, and sent him sprawling into a table so that it flipped, plates and beans and tortillas flying, turning the restaurant into a storm of food and Virgil Sloat Jr. was the only one who went for his gun. Billy saw the tug at the boy's vest, the flash of metal, and for a heartbeat, he saw a different room, a different man going for iron. The memory wired into his muscles. His hand went to his own revolver with the ease of long practice. The Colt cleared leather and barked once before Virgil had even finished pulling his father's pistol. The shot took the brim of Virgil's hat, shearing it clean, and buried itself in the doorframe behind him. Splinters exploded, raining down around Virgil's ears. The rich boy froze, eyes wide, the pistol dangling useless from his fingers. Silence crashed into the room like a second shot. The smell of gunpowder layered itself over Chilean coffee, sharp and metallic. "Pick him up," Billy said quietly, thumb resting loose on the hammer of his Colt as he kept it pointed at the floor between them. "Take your friends and get out." Clay spat blood on the floor and tried to push himself up with shaking arms. "You're dead, you little rat." He slurred around his swelling lip. "My PA. I don't give half a damn what your PA thinks." Billy cut in, the words coming out flat and harder than he'd intended. "You lay hands on that woman again, I'll do more than clip your hat." He meant it. They heard that he meant it. For a heartbeat he saw them not as caricatures of wealth and cruelty, but as what they were. Boys, no younger than him, raised to believe that the world would always bend out of their way. They were scared now, and that scared him too. Because scared rich boys went running to dangerous men. Nate hauled Clay up, Julian wobbling to his feet beside them. Virgil finally reached down, picked up his wounded hat with trembling fingers, and tucked his father's gun back under his vest. "This ain't over," Clay said, but there was more fury than conviction in it. You just picked a fight with every man who matters in Lincoln. Then I guess I'll meet them the same way I met you, Billy replied, holstering his Colt. On their feet, they stumbled out into the street, leaving bloody footprints and the echo of slammed doorwood behind them. For a long moment, nobody moved. Then chairs scraped back, people remembering their own lives. The vaqueros by the window went back to their quiet Spanish, though now and then one of them glanced at Billy with something like reluctant respect. Mrs. Kincaid let out a breath that seemed to come up from her boots. "Well," she said, "that's going to cost me more than plates." Billy turned, suddenly aware of the wreckage he'd made of her livelihood. Upended tables, shattered crockery, coffee cooling in dark puddles on the boards. Shame pricked the back of his neck. "I'll pay for what I broke," he said. "Might take me a while, but I'll settle it." "With what?" she asked, not unkindly. "I know the look of a man who doesn't plan to stay long enough to get a full month's wages. Billy Antrim, or whatever your real name is." He had no answer for that. Before he could try, Leah moved. She'd been quiet, still on her knees on the floor, hands hovering over the broken plates, as if she were trying not to bleed on them. Now she stood slowly, wincing as her coffee-burned skin pulled tight, and pushed a strand of hair back from her face with a wet hand. There were tears on her cheeks. Yes, but her eyes were dry now, clear and steady. "Mrs. Kincaid," she said, "don't scold him. Not tonight. Please." The older woman's face softened. "I'm not scolding him, girl. I'm just counting the cost." She hesitated, then put a hand on Leah's shoulder, briefly, like a benediction. "You all right? My hands will sting for a while." Leah tried to smile. "But I've had worse days." That hurt Billy more than anything Clay had said. "Let me help," he blurted. With all this, Mrs. Kincaid studied him, taking in the gun at his hip, the easy way he'd moved in the fight, the alertness that never quite left his posture. She sighed. "All right then, if you're set on causing trouble in my place, you can damn well stay and sweep up after it. Leah, show him where the towels are. We'll put this back together before morning." As people drifted out, the three of them moved through the wreckage like a small, weary army. Billy picked up overturned tables, feeling the ache in his knuckles and the old familiar buzz of adrenaline starting to ebb. Leah fetched a bucket, face tightening as she dipped her burned hands in the cool water. "Here," Billy said quickly, kneeling beside her. Without asking, he took the rag from her and wrung it out. "You tell me where to scrub." She hesitated, then nodded toward the worst of the coffee pools. "There first. If Mrs. Kincaid wakes up to sticky floors, she'll blame me." "I'm awake already, Mrs. Kincaid called from the counter, where she was tallying what could still be salvaged from the night's disaster. "And I'll blame whoever deserves it." Her tone made it clear she didn't see Leah on that list. Between scrubbing and stacking, the hours slipped by. At some point Mrs. Kincaid went to the kitchen to start a fresh pot of coffee, muttering about needing it if she was going to argue with half the town council come morning. "You know who they are, don't you?" she called, voice carrying from the back. "Those boys you threw around like sacks of feed." "I know enough," Billy answered, not looking up from the floor. "I've seen their kind. Seamus Doyle's boy. Pikes, Cars, Sloats." The names dropped into the room like stones in a well. "Those 4 men run this town between them. Cattle, money, wagons, law. Their sons come in here when I'm out sometimes. Push at Leah, call her names they'd never dare say with me listening. I told her to hit them with a coffee pot next time, but she's too careful. It's a hard thing, being different in a place that doesn't like different." Leah, stacking the few unbroken cups, kept her eyes fixed on the shelf. "I manage," she said. "No, you survive," Mrs. Kincaid corrected gently, walking back in and setting 3 fresh cups on the counter. "There's a difference." She looked at Billy. "And you, boy, whatever you were trying to avoid by keeping quiet, you've just invited it to supper. Those men aren't going to let this go. Their pride won't allow it." "They can come talk to me," Billy said, straightening. "We'll see if we can find a way." "No, Mrs. Kincaid said flatly. "They won't come talk. They'll send someone with a badge, or somebody who wants one, and they'll use whatever name they can pin on you to make it legal." "Billy Antrim, was it?" He hesitated. Leah noticed. Her eyes met his,
And it wasn't just curiosity in them. It was the sharpness of someone who knew what it was to hide parts of herself, so the world wouldn't use them against her. "What's your real name?" she asked quietly. For a moment he thought of lying again. Then he surprised himself. "Henry McCarty," he said, the syllables strange and familiar on his tongue. "Some folks call me William Bonney. Most call me Billy." Her gaze flickered, searching his face for something. "I've heard that last one," she said at last. Not always kindly. "Sounds about right," he said. "But the stories make me taller than I am. Don't believe everything you hear." A tiny smile curved her mouth. "You're tall enough sitting on that chair, punching rich boys," she murmured. Mrs. Kincaid snorted. "Lord save me from half-grown gunfighters with a sense of humor." She poured coffee into 3 cups, set one in front of each of them, and leaned against the counter. "Listen to me, both of you. Leah, I'm glad someone finally stood up in front of those pups for you. But Billy here just put himself in the crosshairs of their fathers. They'll come for him, and they might come for this place to get to him. You understand?" Leah looked at Billy, really looked, and saw not just the quick hands and the dangerous boyish charm, but the weariness around his eyes, the way his shoulders never fully relaxed. "I understand," she said, "but I also understand that if nobody ever stands up, they just keep pushing." She glanced down at her arms, at the pale and brown patches that had marked her since she was 13. "I'm tired of being the only one who pays the price for their boredom." Billy felt something shift inside him at her words. He recognized that tiredness the way it hollowed you out. "Then maybe we share it this time," he said. The next days did not belong to peace. Word of the fight ran ahead of the sunrise, carried on gossip and whiskey breath. By noon the following day, Clay Doyle's swollen lip had become a broken jaw in some tellings. Virgil Sloat's hat had turned into his earlobe, shot clean off. The boys themselves limped around town with a mix of injured pride and secret terror, each retelling making them less at fault, and more the victims of an ambush, by a notorious outlaw. The fathers listened, eyes narrowing, and then sat down together in Amos Pike's back office, where the curtains were always drawn just enough to keep the street from seeing who went in. It was there that Seamus Doyle slammed his fist on Pike's polished desk and declared that no 2-bit cattle thief would humiliate his boy without consequence. It was there that Amos Pike, fingers steepled over his ledgers, reminded them that certain observers in Santa Fe might take a dim view of a public lynching, but a legal hanging, that was another matter. Luther Carr leaned back in his chair, thumbs hooked in his vest, eyes narrowed at the smoke curling from his cigar. He had lost a daughter to a stagecoach robbery years before, a fact nobody mentioned aloud. Some said it was why he now backed every lawman who promised to crack down on road agents. Virgil Sloat Sr., half listening, smoothed the metal of his badge where it lay on the desk, heavy as guilt. "Billy the Kid," he said, tasting the name. "There's already talk of warrants, you know. Territory doesn't like a boy who makes fools out of sheriffs. If we stack this assault on top of everything else, well, gentlemen, there's judges who will sleep easier after signing the rope order." They agreed in their different ways. Doyle with hot promises of vengeance, Pike with cold calculations about debts and favors, Carr with a
curt nod that meant more than any speech, Sloat with the tired resignation of a man who liked to pretend the law and his own interest were the same thing. That night, sheriff's deputies began lingering near the restaurant, not quite stepping inside, not quite walking away. Mrs. Kincaid felt their eyes every time she opened the door. "They're waiting for you," she murmured to Billy once, as he sat at his same corner table, Leah setting a plate down in front of him. "You know that, right?" "That's their problem," he said, though the set of his jaw said he knew it was his too. Leah watched the deputies from the corner of her own eye. She had never cared much for the law one way or the other. It rarely came for men who shoved her, only for men who stole cattle or shot the wrong person. But now its gaze had shifted a degree, and she could feel the weight of it like a hand around her throat. Yet as the days went by, something else shifted too. The first time she stepped out from the kitchen, without the scarf she usually wore high around her neck, Miss Kincaid saw and opened her mouth to scold her back into safety, then shut it again. Billy saw too. His eyes tracked the pale crescent behind her ear, the half moon over her eye, and instead of flinching or looking away, he smiled. Not the slow, calculated smile he used on gamblers and sheriffs, but something softer. "Lantern light suits you," he said simply. Heat flushed under her skin, visible in both shades. "It's just my face, Billy." "Yeah," he replied. "That's what I like about it." The words made her clumsy. She nearly dropped a cup and had to grab it with both hands. Later, in the little yard behind the restaurant where Mrs. Kincaid grew herbs in broken barrels, Leah found him leaning against the adobe wall, hat tipped back, watching the sky bleed into violet over the low roofs of Lincoln. "You shouldn't say things like that," she told him, arms crossed more to contain the tremor in her chest than out of anger. "Why not? They're true." "Because," she struggled for the words, "because if I believe you, it'll hurt more when you ride out of here. Men like you don't stay." He didn't argue. He'd left too many places to pretend otherwise. "Maybe," he said instead. "But until I do, you could try believing at least one person in this town doesn't see a curse when he looks at you." Her arms dropped, her hands curling into the front of his shirt almost before she realized she'd moved. He stood very still as she stepped closer, as if sudden movement might spook her. The distance between them closed like something inevitable. Her heart thrummed against his chest when she leaned up on her toes. The kiss was awkward for half a second, his nose knocking hers, their teeth almost clacking, and then it wasn't. Then it was just warmth, and the faint taste of chili and coffee, and something that felt like a handhold in a river, trying to sweep them both away. When they broke apart, breath mingling in the cooling air, she laughed once, surprised by herself. "Look at me," she whispered, "kissing an outlaw in the backyard like some foolish girl in a dime novel." "Those girls never worry about coffee burns and mortgages," he said gently. "You're braver than they are." The first attempt to take him came 2 days later, just after dawn, in the narrow alley between the livery, where he rented a room, and the general store. Billy had one boot on, one boot in his hand, when he heard the soft crunch of too many feet outside the door. The boards of the tiny room vibrated with male voices. Another man might have frozen. Billy moved. He grabbed his gun, his hat, and the small bundle that held everything worth more than a day's wage to him. The window was too small for most men, but not for him. He slipped through it like a shadow, boots landing noiselessly on the packed earth behind the building. The deputies came around the front, 6 of them, all wearing tired expressions, and the look of men who hoped this would be easy so they could go back to their coffee. One, a new deputy, with more ambition than experience, spotted him first. "There," he yelled, and reached for his gun. Billy didn't want to shoot them, not really. He knew some of them by name, men who spent their wages at Mrs. Kincaid's, who tipped their hats to Leah. But want had very little to do with survival. When the deputy's gun cleared leather, Billy's did too. The alley filled with the deafening thunder of shots in close quarters. A bullet chipped the adobe inches from his shoulder. He fired back, aiming low, trying to scare more than kill. One deputy went down with a scream, hand clamped around a bleeding thigh. Another staggered and dropped his revolver as a bullet slammed into the wood just above his hand, splinters exploding. Someone else fired, wild, and the shot hit a shape that had just stepped into the mouth of the alley. A shape carrying a sack of grain over one shoulder. The stable boy, Tomas, who'd once slipped Billy an apple on a long, hungry night, jerked as if pulled by a string and crumpled to the ground, the grain bursting around him in a pale cloud. Everything stopped for a heartbeat. Billy stared at Tomas, at the spreading red on his shirt, and felt the bottom drop out of something inside him. The deputies looked too, shock and horror wrestling with the echo of adrenaline. "Damn it," one of them whispered. That wasn't Billy. Didn't wait to see where the blame would fall. He ran with the taste of gunpowder in his mouth, and the image of Tomas on the ground burned behind his eyes. By the time the sun climbed fully over the low hills, Billy was miles from town, holed up in an arroyo carved by a dry creek, his horse lathered and blowing, dust grinding between his teeth. He told himself it had been inevitable. Men like him drew bullets the way a storm drew lightning. Staying in Lincoln had always been foolish. He should have ridden out the minute Clay Doyle said his father's name. He should never have touched Leah's face, her hair, never tasted her laughter between his teeth. That afternoon, footsteps scraped on the rocks above his hiding place. His hand went to his gun before his brain even finished turning. "It's me," Leah's voice called softly. "Don't shoot me by mistake, all right?" He exhaled slowly, holstering the Colt, and climbed the short bank. She was crouched there, skirts dusty, a basket beside her covered with a cloth. Sweat darkened the edges of her scarf. She wore it again now, more for sun than shame, and her eyes were lined with worry and stubbornness. "You shouldn't be here," he said, though his chest eased at the sight of her. "They'll be watching the road. Not out past Doyle's lower pasture. Your horse leaves prints like any other. But I know how to walk without being seen. You think you're the only one who's had to learn that?" She pulled back the cloth, revealing tortillas, cooled strips of meat, a jar of beans. "You didn't come by the restaurant. Mrs. Kincaid heard about what happened. About the boy who—" Her voice faltered. "We figured you might be hungry." His throat closed. "Tomas, he liked you," she said. "He liked the way you tipped him, even when you had no money. He made his own choices too, Billy. Don't you dare pile all that weight on your shoulders, as if the rest of us aren't standing right here. If I hadn't been here, then Clay Doyle would still shove me when Mrs. Kincaid's back was turned," she snapped. "Pike's men would still snicker when I walked by. The only difference is I'd still be pretending it doesn't hurt, instead of knowing at least one man in this town is willing to pay a price to say it does." Her anger startled him, sharp and clean as broken glass, but beneath it he heard fear and something else. The sound of a woman who had decided she was done ducking the blows. They ate in the shade of a scrubby juniper, the land stretching out before them in soft, deceptive curves. "You should come with me," he said, at last. "There's places south of here where Doyle's name doesn't mean anything. I speak enough Spanish to talk us across the line. We could find some dusty little town where nobody cares about your skin or my past." For a moment, he saw it in her face, the pull of that dream. A place where she wasn't whispered about, where men like Doyle's boy were just stories told over whiskey, not boots in the doorway. "And you'd what? Take work on a ranch until somebody recognized you?" she asked, softly. "Start running again? I've listened to you talk in the quiet between customers, Billy. You carry ghosts with you already. You think outrunning these 4 men will shake them off?" He looked away. The question hit too close. "You're better than this town," he muttered. "That might be," she said. "But it's my town, my life, Mrs. Kincaid. She gave me work when other places said no, because customers didn't want to look at me while they ate. If I run now, they win twice. They chase you off, and they make sure I never stop being the girl who kept her head down and took it." Her eyes shone, but not with tears. "I don't want to be that girl anymore." He saw it then, the change in her that had started the moment she saw him stand up and throw that first punch. Not because she liked violence, but because she'd watched someone decide that her pain mattered more than his own safety. That decision had cracked something open inside her. She wasn't going to let anyone close it again, not even him. "So what do you want to be?" he asked, quietly. She considered. "The woman who opens the restaurant every morning without flinching," she said at last. "The woman kids like Tomas remember because she slipped them extra tortillas when their bellies growled. The woman who, when people try to blame their bad sons on witches and curses, stands in the middle of the street where everyone can see her skin and says, 'No, your sons did that all by themselves.'" He stared at her, marveling at how big she sounded all of a sudden. Not because her voice had changed, but because she'd finally decided it held weight. "You talk like you expect to live to be old," he said. "Somebody in this story should," she replied. That night he went back to town. Mrs. Kincaid nearly hit him with a rolling pin when he stepped through the kitchen door. "You idiot," she hissed. "Half the deputies in Lincoln are looking for you, and you waltz back in here." "I'm tired of running," he said. "And I'm more tired of Doyle's boy thinking this place is his playground." "Fine words from someone who can leave whenever he pleases," she muttered. But she moved aside to let him wash up and set plates anyway. Trouble didn't make itself wait long. The following evening, just as the sky went from pink to deep blue, the big men came. Not their sons this time, but the fathers themselves, each carrying the sector of the town they owned like a cloak. Amos Doyle's bulk filled the doorway first, the smell of ranch dust and cattle grease clinging to him. Amos Pike followed with his neat mustache and cold eyes, as if he saw numbers floating above everyone's head. Luther Carr came next, lean and sun-browned, line of his mouth set in an old grief that had soured into determination. Virgil Sloat Sr. brought up the rear, his badge polished, his hat brim low to hide the fatigue in his expression. They took a table without asking. Conversation faltered. Leah's hand shook only once as she carried their coffee out. "Evening, gentlemen," she said, voice steady. "What can we get you?" Doyle's gaze swept over her face, lingered on the pale patches, and curled with disdain. "You can start by firing the gun hand who laid my boy out on the floor," he growled. "He's not my gun hand," Mrs. Kincaid said, appearing at Leah's shoulder. "He's a customer, and tonight, he's not even that. He's washing dishes. Unless any of you fine gentlemen plan to roll up your sleeves and help, I suggest you quit trying to tell me how to run my place." Pike's mouth twitched. "You've got some nerve, May," he said, "especially considering you still owe my bank 3 months back interest, and you've got some nerve bringing that up in front of my girl, Amos," she shot back. "You want to talk ledgers, we do it in your office. You want supper, you sit and eat without harassing my staff. Those are the rules here." Luther Carr watched them, eyes unreadable. Virgil Sloat drummed his fingers on the table, the metal of his badge catching lantern light. "Your boy and his friends laid hands on my girl," Mrs. Kincaid went on, heat rising in her voice. "Called her filthy witch, inferior. Shoved her to the floor. You think I'm going to punish the one person in this whole mess who acted like a man? He pulled a gun on my son," Doyle snapped. "He could have killed him. Your son drew first," a quiet voice said from the back. Billy stepped out from the kitchen, then, hands empty, dishwater still clinging to his forearms. He looked smaller without his guns, younger, but the line of his shoulders was pure stubborn. "I only shot his hat," he added. "That's a mercy some men wouldn't have shown." Doyle surged halfway to his feet, rage flushing his neck. Carr's hand shot out, pressing him back into his chair. "Easy, Shay," he murmured. "Not in front of the good china." Pike studied Billy, eyes cold and assessing. "Henry McCarty, William Bonney, Billy the Kid. I've seen your names in more than one letter from Santa Fe," he said. "You've already left a trail of bodies behind you, boy. Sheriff Sloat here has a stack of paper that says so. Some of those papers lie, and some don't," Billy replied. "But none of them mention Leah. She didn't ask for any of this. Your sons brought it to her feet. I won't apologize for making them pick it up." Carr blew out a smoke-laced breath. "This is going nowhere useful," he said. "The fact is, our boys are bruised and scared. Our deputies have a hole in one of their legs. And Tomas Marquez is lying still in his mother's house, because a bullet meant for you went wrong." His gaze sharpened. "There's going to be a reckoning. The only question is how ugly we make it." The reckoning came 2 nights later. The men of Lincoln liked their justice, with a bit of theater when they could get it. They waited until half the town had finished supper, and drifted toward the square, drawn by rumors of a meeting about law and order. Leah tried to slip out the back of the restaurant, when she heard the murmurs rising, but Mrs. Kincaid caught her arm. "You don't have to go," the older woman said. "This isn't your fight. It became my fight when Clay Doyle grabbed me." Leah replied, "If they say my name and I'm not there to answer it, I stay what I've always been to them. A shadow, a rumor. I'm tired of that." They went together, Leah's heart hammering so hard she could feel it in her burned hands. The square flickered with torchlight, faces thrown into strange relief, angles sharp and eyes hollow. On the makeshift platform in front of the courthouse, Doyle, Pike, Carr, and Sloat stood shoulder to shoulder like the 4 points of a crooked compass. Sheriff's deputies flanked them, rifles at rest but ready. In front of the platform hung a length of rope already knotted into a rough noose. It swayed slightly in the evening breeze, a promise rather than a threat. "People of Lincoln," Virgil Sloat called, his voice carrying over the murmur. "We're here to talk about law. about what we tolerate in our streets. An outlaw shot at our deputies, assaulted the sons of good men, and got a local boy killed in the crossfire. A low murmur of grief moved through the crowd at Tomas's name. His mother stood near the front, face carved into stone by tears that had run out hours ago. "We can't let that stand," Sloat continued. "If we do, we might as well hand this town over to every drifter with a gun on his hip." "Funny thing," a voice said from the shadow of the mercantile's awning. "Far as I can tell, you already did." Heads turned. Billy stepped into the torchlight, hat low, guns visible, but holstered. A ripple of tension spread through the crowd, some people stepping back, others pressing forward for a better look. He walked toward the platform, as if he had been invited, as if the noose were just another decoration. Deputies shifted uneasily, but none wanted to be the first to draw. Leah's breath caught in her throat. Standing there, he looked both taller and more breakable than he had in the restaurant, the torchlight catching on the edge of fear at the corner of his mouth. "You wanted me," he said, stopping a few yards from the platform. "I'm here. Let's talk face to face instead of hiding behind your boys." Doyle's hand clenched around nothing, as if he wanted it to be Billy's throat. "There's nothing to talk about," he snarled. "You're here. You hang. That's law. Law is supposed to look the same whether you're rich or poor," Billy said. "But you and I both know that's a story folks tell themselves when they want to sleep at night." Murmurs stirred. A few people nodded, quickly, when they thought nobody was watching. "You think you're some kind of hero?" Pike asked, contempt thick in his voice. "Beating up boys half drunk, hiding behind a woman's skirt." Billy's jaw tightened. Before he could answer, Leah pushed forward through the crowd until she stood at his side, pale and brown patches thrown into stark relief by the fire. "He didn't hide behind anything," she said, loud enough for the front rows to hear. Her voice shook at first, then steadied. "Your sons came into my workplace. They called me witch, inferior, filthy, all because my skin doesn't match itself. They put their hands on me. They shoved me down. Billy did what none of you ever thought to do. He told them no." A hush rippled outward. It was one thing to gossip about the strange girl with the mottled skin. It was another to have her stand in the center of town, under the same torchlight as the men who owned their debts, and speak without bowing her head. Clay Doyle shifted, pale under his bruises. For the first time, shame prickled at the edges of his anger. "You should have complained to us, girl," Doyle muttered. "Not sick some outlaw on them." "I did complain," she said, heat sparking in her chest. "I complained with every flinch you pretended not to see. I complained when I wrapped my hands in rags, so your sons wouldn't have to look at my skin while I served them. I complained when I did my job well, every single night, and you looked through me like I was furniture. You just didn't listen." Someone in the back laughed, short and bitter. It turned quickly into a cough, but the sound had already done its work. A crack appeared in the wall of certainty around the powerful men. Sloat's eyes flicked to the rope, to Billy, to Tomas's mother in the front row. There was no good way out of this that satisfied everyone. Doyle didn't care. "I don't give a damn what you think you deserve," he snarled. "A nobody like you doesn't get to stand here," and his hand went to the pistol at his hip. Billy saw the movement, and his body reacted before his mind. His hand flashed toward his own gun. At the same moment, one of the deputies, young, jittery, sweaty, around the collar, misread everything, and yanked his rifle up, finger too tight on the trigger. Leah saw it all happen in a single stretched-out instant. Doyle's hand, Billy's, the deputy's flinch. Some part of her understood, with a strange, clear calm, that the easiest thing in the world in that moment was for the story to end the way everyone expected. Bullets, blood, another corpse on the ground with her name tangled somewhere in the blame. Without thinking, she moved. She stepped in front of Billy, arms spread as if that small gesture could turn Lead aside. In that heartbeat, she chose. She chose to be more than the girl who took whatever the world threw at her. If steel was going to fly because someone finally said her life mattered, then by God, she would look it in the face. Time snapped back. The deputy's rifle cracked. Doyle's pistol cleared leather. Leah braced for the impact she was sure was coming. It never reached her. Another shot tore through the night, sharp and commanding. Its origin not at Billy's hip, but from the platform itself. Luther Carr's gun barked once, his aim as steady as it had been the day he'd missed saving his own daughter. The bullet struck the deputy's rifle barrel, knocking it sideways. The shot that had been aimed at Billy, and now at Leah, went wild, splintering the wooden post of the platform instead of flesh. Sparks flew as hot metal met stone. Leah felt the wind of it tear past her shoulder, heard someone scream behind her as a shard of wood bit into their leg, but she remained standing, heart slamming so hard it threatened to leap from her chest. Carr kept his pistol leveled, not at Billy, but at Doyle. "Put it away, Shay," he said, voice low but carrying. "You shoot an unarmed woman in front of half the town. No judge in Santa Fe is going to call that justice. They'll call it murder. And don't pretend we don't all have things in our pasts we'd rather they not take too close a look at." Doyle froze, chest heaving, knuckles white around his gun. For a moment, hatred and calculation waged war on his face. The hatred wanted Billy's blood. The calculation saw Carr's steady hand, and the way some in the crowd were looking at Leah with something too close to sympathy to be safe. Slowly, with a curse, he shoved the pistol back into its holster. "You taking his side now?" he snarled at Carr. "I'm taking the town's side," Carr replied. "You hang this boy tonight, some will say it was justice. You shoot that girl, you turn her into a martyr, and you give every restless cowboy between here and Mesilla a story about how Lincoln treats its women. Freight lines run on more than wheels, Shay, they run on reputation. I won't have my wagons burned because you couldn't control your temper." Pike nodded reluctantly. He'd already been doing the math. Tomas's death, the deputy's wounds, Doyle's bruised boy, the strange girl with the marked face stepping into Bullet's path, the outlaw who kept refusing to shoot first. The ledgers didn't balance neatly. Sloat looked old in that moment, older than the badge on his chest. "Fine," Doyle spat. "What then? We just let him ride off with a hero's welcome?" "Hardly," Carr said. He holstered his pistol with a decisive click. "We do what the territory would have done anyway, if you hadn't decided to stage a show. We outlaw him proper. He leaves Lincoln County by dawn. If he's seen within a day's ride after that, then every rifle in this town will have a right to claim him. In return, we leave May's place alone. We don't send boys or men to push this girl around again. And Amos forgives 3 months back interest on that mortgage, because frankly, Amos, you've made enough off this town to bleed a little." Pike bristled, then saw the crowd's eyes on him, and forced a tight smile. 3 months, he conceded. "No more, done," Carr said. He looked at Billy. "You don't strike me as stupid, kid. Take the offer." Billy's pride flared. It wanted to spit in Carr's face, to declare he owed these men nothing. But he felt Leah at his side, trembling, alive only because one of the powerful men had for once chosen the slightly less brutal path. He thought of Tomas, of Mrs. Kincaid, of the way people were looking at him now, not as a legend in a dime novel, not as a monster, but as a man caught in the gears of something bigger than he could shoot his way out of. "I was planning to go anyway," he said. "I stay too long anywhere. Trouble finds me. Seems to have found you quick enough here," Sloat muttered. "Maybe," Billy replied. "But this time, it found me standing where I don't regret standing." He turned to Leah then, the crowd blurring into insignificance. "I meant what I said out there by the juniper," he told her softly. "You're better than this town. But if you're set on staying and making it better instead, that might be the bravest thing I've ever seen." Her throat worked as she swallowed. "I thought you were going to die," she whispered. "I thought I was too," he admitted. "But if I had, at least it would have been for something that made sense, for once." She shook her head, tears finally spilling over, cutting tracks through the dust on her cheeks, pale and brown alike. "Don't talk like a ghost already." "Then don't look at me like one," he said. "This isn't forever, just for now." Carr cleared his throat pointedly. "Dawn," he reminded. Billy nodded, tore his gaze away from Leah with visible effort, and stepped back. The crowd parted for him, a corridor of faces and stories he'd never know. Some stared with open hatred, others with the wary respect reserved for men who stepped into the line of fire and walked out again. A few looked at him, and then at Leah, and seemed to reconsider certain things they'd always assumed about beauty and worth, and who was allowed to stand in the center of the square. He disappeared into the dark edges of the street, his footsteps swallowed by the shifting murmur. Later that night, in the narrow alley behind the restaurant, he waited while she closed up. The lamplight spilling from the kitchen door cut his face in half, one side bright, one side shadow. When she stepped out, apron off but hands still smelling of coffee and cumin, they just looked at each other for a long moment. "You really going?" she asked, though she knew the answer. "If I don't, they'll push until somebody else dies," he said. "Maybe you, maybe May, maybe some kid who never heard my name until someone shouted it while sighting down a barrel. I've got enough ghosts already. And what am I supposed to do with the ones you're leaving me?" she asked, voice cracking. "With the memory of you punching Clay Doyle, with the way you looked at me like I was whole." He stepped closer, close enough to see the fine lines beginning at the corners of her eyes from squinting into the sun, to smell the faint sweetness of cornbread clinging to her hair. "You take them," he said. "You let them remind you that you never were what they called you. Not witch, not inferior, not filthy. You're the woman who stood up in front of the whole damn town and made Doyle put his gun away. You hold on to that when they try to make you small again." She laughed, a wet, shaky sound. "You talk like you're some wise old man, but you're barely older than me." "Don't tell my knees that," he said. The joke landed only halfway. They stood there in the half-light, the air thick with everything they weren't saying. Finally she reached up, cupped his face in her hands, burned, scarred, strong, and pulled him down into a kiss that was nothing like the tentative brush behind the herb barrels. It was fierce and full of all the words they didn't have time for. He answered with equal urgency, hands at her waist, memorizing the feel of her, the way her breath hitched when he traced the line where pale became brown at her jaw. When they broke apart, breathing ragged, she rested her forehead against his. "If you ever find that little town you talked about," she whispered, "the one where my skin doesn't make people talk and your name doesn't make them reach for a gun, think of me when the sun goes down." "I already do," he said. "Every time I taste red chili." She smiled, watery and luminous. "Then go, Billy," she said, "before I change my mind and make you stay." He rode out before dawn, the sky just beginning to pale over the low hills, the air cold enough to sting his lungs. As Lincoln shrank behind him, he didn't look back, because he knew if he did, he might turn the horse around and undo whatever small good his leaving could still do. Years later, in another town, on another hot night, Pat Garrett would shoot him in a darkened room at Fort Sumner. And songs and stories would argue forever about whether he was a villain or a folk hero, a murderer or a boy trapped in the teeth of a machine too big for him. None of those stories would mention a restaurant in Lincoln, or a girl with skin like moonlight on River Rock, who once threw her thin body between him and a bullet. But in Lincoln, people remembered. They remembered the night Leah Valdez stood under torchlight and told the men who owned their debts that their son's cruelty was their own, not the work of curses. They remembered how, after Billy rode away, Doyle's boy never quite met her eyes again. How Nate Pike one day left 3 extra coins on the table and muttered an apology that she didn't let him off the hook for, but also didn't throw back in his face. They remembered how the restaurant stayed open, despite everything. How Mrs. Kincaid's laughter grew louder with time. How Leah stopped wearing the scarf even on days when the sun was brutal, choosing instead to let the world see every patch and line of her story. Some evenings, when the plates were washed and the lamps turned low, she would sit in Billy's old corner with a plate of enchiladas, stacked high and steaming, and stare out the window at the dark street. Anyone watching might have thought she was waiting. She wasn't. She was remembering. She was measuring every small victory against the weight of the past, and finding, to her quiet surprise, that she was winning more often than not. And somewhere between the chilies and the coffee, between one breath and the next, she would feel a strange, steady peace. Whatever the legend said about Billy the Kid, she knew one thing that didn't fit neatly on a wanted poster. Once, in a town that tried to grind them both down into dust, he had chosen to stand beside her. And that choice had changed the shape of her whole life. If this story played out like a little movie in your mind, and you rode along with Billy and Leah until the last line, I'd love to know what you thought. Leave your rating from 0 to 10. Tell me in the comments what hit you hardest. And if you want to keep traveling through the Old West with more tales like this, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and leave a like, so I know you're out there listening.